Hi there. So today we're going to start diving into some of the age-related changes that happen as we get a little closer to perimenopause and menopause. And so a lot of people start experiencing things like mood changes, hot flashes, fatigue, brain fog, extra bloating and constipation, insomnia, all kinds of problems, maybe even some joint pain. And there's actually a role of your gut health and your overall health, which is impacted by your gut, for all of these issues. So we're going to dive into these each in turn, but I want to talk about them in regards to the metabolic changes that are happening in your body because of the hormone shifts. So first we have to understand that your gut impacts your hormones and your hormones impact your gut. And then we also know that there's a role of both hormones and gut health in terms of, sleep, stress, obviously diet, lifestyle, your exercise levels. All of these things are going to impact both your hormones and your gut health. So unfortunately, balancing both hormones and your gut health is not as simple as, just changing one thing. For example, eating more fiber. Yes, that's important and necessary, but that in itself is not going to be enough to make a big difference. Or taking a supplement for your hormones. Also going to help, but not going to make a big enough difference. We have to do everything all together in order to really reap the benefits and prevent further health issues, and also prevent things that are like, very big chronic diseases, things like diabetes and heart disease. These are all things that we can prevent with our diet and lifestyle, working on that now, today. But that being said, I don't want you to get overwhelmed thinking that, oh my God, what's the point if I can't do all of these things at once and change everything all at the same time and do all the things every day? So like exercising and eating well and doing all the things, then what's the point? Holly says it's not going to work. That's not the case. Obviously, what we're doing here, because I built this membership in this way, I'm doing it I want you to do small baby steps, right? So what you can maybe do as you go along and kind of take some notes and think of the things that you want to work on and maybe prioritize them in terms of what you think is doable for you in this time in your life. So maybe, you make a list of 4 things, and what you think is most doable for you right now is to eat more fiber. So first you make that your first goal for, say, 3 or 4 weeks, or whatever is best for you. Obviously, life happens. Sometimes these things go out the window and we have to get back on track. Then maybe your next goal can be to add in an extra day of movement per week. So if you're already doing 1 or 2 walks per week, maybe you can add in 1 extra day where you do some resistance training, and you can build that habit for another month or so until that becomes a habit. The idea is to build small habits that are sustainable one at a time and kind of build on each other so that you're gradually building this healthy lifestyle. You're not feeling overwhelmed, because obviously in the world we're living in right now, a lot of us are going through a lot of stress, a lot of change and upheaval, and I don't want to add more stress and worry to your life. I want to make this as simple as possible. So if at any time you're feeling lost or overwhelmed and you're not sure what your next best step is, do reach out to me, because you do get a session included in your membership for those of you who purchased before December 1st, 2021. So if you're watching this after that, unfortunately it's not included, but I do offer free 15-minute consults if you want some guidance, and then from there we can see if we can work together. Anyways, let's get into the actual changes that happen when our hormones start shifting. One of the big things is our blood sugar. So blood sugar imbalances are very, very common. It's becoming almost an epidemic proportion of people that are having, basically they're in pre-diabetes state or they've developed diabetes. What I want you to know with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, first of all, don't panic if you do get diagnosed with this or warned by your doctor that you're heading in that direction, because contrary to what your doctor or someone else might say, it very much is reversible if you do the right things. So we're talking about eating well and exercise are the 2 main things, and we're going to dive more into that, but I want you to not stress and realize that it is reversible. So with blood sugar, there's many aspects that impact your blood sugar. There is a role of your microbiome, stress, and your hormones, and then obviously your level of activity. So let's start by talking about hormone-related changes. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I am not a specialist in women's hormones by any means, but I do know the basics and how it connects with gut health. So I'm just going to kind of share the basics with you. What I will say as well before we dive into this is that it's important that if you think you have a hormone imbalance, or you're already, well into perimenopause, possibly menopause, and you're really struggling with symptoms, that you reach out to someone like a naturopath and get testing done. You can get testing through your doctor, but unfortunately, most of the time, the doctor doesn't have a lot to offer, and what they consider normal is not optimal. You could go in there with a ton of symptoms, and they look at your numbers, and as long as they're within this huge reference range, they're gonna tell you you're normal. But obviously, you don't feel good, right? So when you work with a naturopath, or someone like myself, we're looking for an optimal level, a smaller window where this is where you wouldn't have any symptoms and you're going to feel your best, right? And we also test things very differently in a functional medicine practice than doctors do. So for example, blood testing for hormones is not ideal. Dr. Spark that I work with, she uses urine testing. It's called the Dutch test. So if you want to look that up and check that out. It's way more accurate, and it provides us with a huge document, a huge report that tells us exactly where things are going wrong in your cycle or in your hormones and the metabolism of them and how they convert, and because they're all connected to each other, right? Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, your adrenal stress hormones, they're all connected. And it tells us exactly where things are going wrong. And so that tells us, or Dr. Spark, what exactly we can do to fix that, okay? So there are options as well, so I don't want you to feel that your only option when it comes to balancing your hormones is to take birth control if you're younger, or to take hormones from your doctor if you're older. So first of all, birth control messes up your body, and if you've already come off it, you probably have experienced that already. It's going to cause weight gain, it's going to cause mood swings, it's prone to cause you gut issues, including gallstones and biofilms, which make this bacteria killing and balancing way harder than it has to be. And then the other thing too is the hormones, not bioidentical. So naturopaths use bioidentical hormones, which are made to mimic exactly our hormones in our body, which are the best option with the least side effects and risks. Whereas most doctors, from what I understand, use synthetic hormones, often derived from horse urine, so things like Premarin. And often they prescribe estrogen without progesterone, which they should not be doing because that really increases your risk of things like cancers, so hormone-related cancers, breast, ovarian, all of that. Because estrogen is naturally inflammatory, and because our bodies, if you think about it, like as women, younger women, our bodies naturally produce both estrogen and progesterone. They're supposed to balance each other out because estrogen helps cells proliferate and grow and stay healthy, but it's a little bit inflammatory. Progesterone is very calming, soothing, anti-inflammatory, and calms things down, right? So our body doesn't get too out of control. So that's why women, when they have this estrogen dominance, which a lot of women do, when we have these, strong hormonal symptoms like bloating and cravings and mood swings and all of that, that is often because, just lost my train of thought. Yes, hormone changes. You are going to be having these symptoms if you're estrogen dominant, and many women are, for many reasons, so including using birth control, adrenal fatigue, all of that. But what I want to just take a step back and say is that we need to balance those hormones, right? Regardless, we can't just have estrogen. We can't just prescribe estrogen and not use progesterone. We can't use just progesterone. Usually, it's way less risk because it's not as inflammatory. And so naturopaths often prescribe both, right? And we're looking for this optimal ratio. We're not looking at the relative numbers. I've worked with Dr. Spark on my hormones, and for example, I got tested, my estrogen was fairly low because I'm very thin and you need body fat to make estrogen, which is another reason that women who are in larger bodies tend to have more estrogen dominance and hormone issues. But my estrogen was too low. But in regards to my progesterone, which was basically non-existent, I had none at all, that's estrogen dominance, right? So I was having these estrogen dominant symptoms, even though my estrogen was actually low. It wasn't anywhere near where it should be, but because I had no progesterone to balance it out, I was having these symptoms. So that's somewhere where I started on a progesterone cream to bring up my levels so that they would be more balanced, right? And we ideally want a 10-to-1 ratio, so 10 estrogen to 1 progesterone. So for example, you would want, if your progesterone was 70, you would want around 700 for estrogen. Just a quick example, but I digress. So when in terms of estrogen changes, so as we enter perimenopause, what's happening there is not necessarily that your hormones have dropped off a lot. It's more so that they're fluctuating quite a bit at this phase in your life. And many things can make that worse. So if you have adrenal fatigue, aka burnout, that's going to make it worse. Lack of sleep, high stress, poor diet, lack of movement. These are all things that are going to make your hormones fluctuate more. But typically this phase is where your hormones are fluctuating. So at one point they could be really high, at another point they could be really low, and it's the change that is causing these symptoms. Whereas, my screen just went dark here. Whereas once you hit menopause, it's the lack of hormones that are causing this symptom. So you tend to be low in both estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And we're going to talk about how these changes in menopause cause issues. So number one, we need estrogen for insulin sensitivity. So if you think back, if you haven't gone through that part of the course already, insulin is released when we eat food. And it's our body's response. So it's the key that lets the sugar from our food, so everything is digested eventually into simple sugars, and our body needs to absorb that into our cells, into our individual cells, to be used to make energy. And insulin is the key that allows that sugar to get into the cell so our body can use that and make energy. But people that develop insulin resistance, and there's many reasons, so that can be poor diet, stress levels, hormone imbalances. Basically, the sugar is just sitting outside the cell, and the insulin either it's not there, or the cell just it's not responsive to it anymore. It's like, I hear you knocking, but I'm not opening the door kind of thing, right? So the insulin can't get the sugar into the cell. So you're going to have extreme fatigue, because that it's constantly high circulating insulin, high blood sugar. Insulin is anabolic, so it helps build things up, right? So you're going to start storing that sugar as fat rather than using it for energy. Okay, so our food's been broken down into sugar, it's trying to get into the cell, it can't get in. So now your body's like, well, clearly I have too much, I might as well just store this extra sugar as fat. So that's where we start to get more body fat. And that's especially common around the midsection for those of you who are dealing with that, if you have adrenal fatigue and very high stress levels, because that is high cortisol, the stress hormone that is promoting that. So what we need is estrogen for insulin sensitivity. So a lot of women, as they start to get into menopause, will have lowered insulin sensitivity, so they start to gain weight. They're more tired because they're not getting that sugar into the cell. And on top of that, now their blood sugar is going up, and their doctor might say, look, you're at risk for diabetes. So we really have to be careful and be proactive so that we don't develop these health concerns, right? Because if you think you're limited with your food options now, if you were to develop diabetes, you'd have to be even more strict, right? So we need that estrogen. So what can we do if you are low in estrogen, you're having some of these issues? That's where you would go and get tested with ideally a naturopath, if you can afford that, because it is a little pricey. And then they would institute, if needed, some hormone therapy. If not needed, we might switch gears, which I'm going to move to in a second, and talk more about how do we optimize the body to balance the hormones naturally without bringing in external hormones. So that's where gut health and liver health come into play. And we're going to talk more about that in a separate video. But first, I just want to touch a little bit more on blood sugar. Next thing is your gut microbiome. We talked about insulin sensitivity. We're going to talk now about your microbiome. There's actually a lot of research that's come out that shows that your gut microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, directly impact your blood sugar. And one of the most common diabetes drugs, metformin, has actually been proven, at least partially, to work by modulating the balance of bacteria in the gut, and by doing so, bringing down your blood sugar. So that's pretty interesting. But there are many other ways besides metformin, which has many side effects and risks associated with it, to balance our gut bacteria and help balance our hormones and our gut health at the same time. So obviously those are things we talked about a lot in this course and inside the group. So that means eating more fiber, less processed carbs and sugar, lots of antioxidants, fermented foods. And then some people do well with probiotics. But again, I don't ever want you to go out and grab a probiotic without consulting a practitioner. You might think they're fairly inert, and they are, but if you have gut issues, it could make you feel a lot worse. Okay, so it's not completely inert, and especially if you're someone who has any kind of serious condition like cancer or you're immunocompromised in any way, probiotics are not safe for you. So the next thing I want to touch on before we move away from blood sugar and talk more about liver and bile and all of that good stuff, including fatty liver, which seems to be increasingly common, I want to talk a little bit about exercise. So as much as I am not a personal trainer or anything like that, we know the importance of exercise. Exercise has actually been proven to help balance your microbiome. Getting that extra oxygen and the metabolic changes that happen when you exercise has been proven to increase diversity of your gut microbiome. So more diversity, more of the good guys are growing in there when you exercise regularly. That's pretty cool stuff. But the next thing I want to mention here is that in terms of blood sugar balancing, especially if you've been told you're at risk for diabetes, you're pre-diabetes, or you've been diagnosed with diabetes, is that we need to do more resistance or muscle building exercise than cardio. Cardio is great, makes you feel good, it's good for you in general, it's healthy, it helps you sleep, many good benefits to cardio. But when it comes to metabolism and your blood sugar, resistance or muscle building exercise is way more important. So I highly recommend you focus more on that. Also, importantly, as we age, we rapidly lose muscle mass, and if you're not exercising all along, your bones can become quite frail. So the last thing you need at age, 50, 55, 60, when you're moving into retirement and you want to enjoy your retirement, is to break a hip or some other bone, and then your quality of life just goes downhill very fast. So that's one of the number one things that happen to people that are aging, especially seniors, where they just rapidly decline, and we don't want that to happen to you, right? So let's be proactive. Obviously, I'm not going to prescribe specific exercises myself, but anything that is weight bearing, so things like even like yoga, where you're holding your body weight up, doing squats or planks, bird dog, if you've ever tried that. I am going to have on my friend Nicole Thorne at some point. She's a personal trainer with a focus on women's health and core strength, which is so very important. And I do have a few other videos in the membership. If you haven't checked them out yet, I will link to them as well. But I want you to really start looking at building more of this into your routine, even if it's 2 or 3 times a week for only 10 or 15 minutes, or even 5 minutes. Every little bit counts. Even if you just have a resistance band at home, and while you're watching TV, you sit and you do some band exercises. Obviously, if you're new to exercising and especially if you have any chronic pain or existing health conditions, you want to speak with your practitioner before diving into something. But for the average person, if you're starting really low and slow and listening to your body, it should be safe to do very light, very simple exercises. And why that works for metabolism and blood sugar. So every time our muscles do work, they need fuel for that, right? So the fuel for them is sugar from your bloodstream. So we eat a meal, the sugar goes into our bloodstream, so now our blood sugar's gone up a bit. Our muscles start doing work. So the muscles actually take sugar from the bloodstream and bring it into the muscle so it can use it for energy. And that has a net effect of bringing down your blood sugar to a healthier level. So that's why it's so very important. And the bonus part of all of that is you're not just managing your blood sugar, because the more muscle you build, the higher your metabolism is. So if you're concerned about weight gain at this phase in your life, having that extra muscle is going to make it that much easier to stay at a healthier weight for you. And that looks different for everyone. I don't focus on weight loss, and I don't think there's a particular weight that anyone should be. But we do know that excess body fat, especially in certain areas like your abdomen, is a higher risk factor for certain illnesses like heart disease and diabetes. So we want to kind of manage that as much as possible. So I'm going to end this video here because I don't want to make them too long, and then we're going to dive into a separate video on liver and digestive health and how that's impacted by hormones, and they are all connected. So I hope you'll join me for that one too.